Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dan Sloat, one of your co-hosts and the CEO of P3 Tech Consulting.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. We've got some great topics we're going to be talking about today. A UAM vertiport network proposed in Northern California by two companies partnering. We're also going to be discussing the advancements of drone technology or UAM technology in the Middle East, specifically talking about the Dubai Airshow. We're going to be talking about a recurring topic now about the use of drone bombs, this time south of the border in Mexico, and how the cartel are utilizing them. And then we're going to end on some copyright issues with ChatGPT, which has been our favorite topic for probably 6 months now. All right, and we've got some great guests to discuss these things today. I'm going to start with Michael. Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good morning. My name is Mike Parrott. I'm a course director at the Joint Special Operations University, commonly referred to as JSOU. I'm a 24-year Army combat veteran with over 16 years in the special ops community. I've got a master's degree in strategic security studies from the National Defense University and a BA in Homeland Security with a concentration in Counterterrorism Studies. So again, Don and Mike, thank you for inviting me to the show today. Look forward to discussing some interesting articles.
Hey, I want to jump in real quick to acknowledge not only Michael's service, but also to the service of all the veterans that are out there. Veterans Day is coming up, and I've got my red, white, and blue going on. I've got my shadow box and flag in the background here, but I also wanted to thank Dan, who's going to introduce himself here in a second. His involvement with the Advanced Air Mobility Institute and the report you guys just put out today honoring veterans in AAM. I was honored to be a part of that, and a lot of my colleagues too. So thank you for that, Dan. Over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Don. I am a founder and president of the Advanced Air Mobility Institute. We are a 501c3 international nonprofit research center. In a sense, our core mission is to educate and advocate for the broadest public benefit in the advanced air mobility ecosystem on a global basis. And we felt that, of course, this time of year is particularly advantageous opportunity to acknowledge the many contributions of military veterans, not only to aviation in a broad sense, but to this new exciting field of advanced air mobility, making use and really pushing the envelope forward with UAS drone technology as well as eVTOL aircraft.
Well, happy to have you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think you'll be well versed to talk about the articles everybody picked today. So let's start with the first one. Skyway Technologies and Berg Holdings to establish an urban air mobility vertiport network in Northern California. So tell us about the big picture here, Dan.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So another hat that I wear in this industry, I also serve as CEO of Volatus Infrastructure and Energy Solutions. We are a vertiport provider as well as electric charging provider. And we thought this would be a good chance to really highlight some of our friends and colleagues over at Skyway Technologies. Some people might paint them as a pure competitor. That's just plainly not the way we see it. There's such a large proverbial pie, if you will. The advanced mobility market is going to be, I think, far larger than many people realize. But they are doing some fantastic work over in Northern California. Many people are aware, of course, traffic woes throughout California, and it's great to see Cliff and Patrick over at Skyway really are leading effort as far as strategic partnerships. This one in particular, this article discussed their partnership with Berg Holdings, and this has to do with not only passenger transport, trying to expedite the movement of people, but also of goods, cargo delivery. Throughout the Mountain View, Sonoma County, San Jose region. what's interesting about this space, the natural geographic limitations present a fantastic opportunity for advanced air mobility to really highlight the time savings potential.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm pretty excited by this. It seems like it's a more, I guess, bold move than we've seen, bold and intelligent move than we've seen in the past, saying this is where we're going to be starting. And I'm curious, Michael, what do you think about it?
I think it's a great technology, and you need to come out here to Florida, come out here to Tampa, Orlando, so that way I-4 will get cleared up and I can get to work.
Yeah. I've sat in that traffic before.
That way I can get to work on time. So, no, definitely think the technology's there. Of course, there's always going to be security concerns with that, and who's going to be able to get licenses on it, who's going to be able to get trained and certified to fly those eVTOLs. We don't want what happened during 9/11 to happen again, where there's no regulation on who can get certified to be pilots, and then all of a sudden we've got terrorists flying them into buildings packed with explosives or something.
Michael's worldview is always going to go back to things blowing up, just to warn everybody. That's okay. That's okay.
So actually, I have a question for Dan based on that. So depending on how automated or fully autonomous these things end up being, what are the ways that you think the industry is going to raise the level of security to make sure that these are not hackable and can become like a coordinated problem?
Certainly, and absolutely agree with the remarks by Michael. In fact, at the Advanced Air Mobility Institute, we have 3 guiding principles: safety, dignity, and security. And while we think about security to encompass really all of the various systems that society relies on, no question, cybersecurity is at the forefront of this new transportation industry. I'll say that there is a lot of, I don't pretend to know too deep on the hard science behind it, but there's also a parallel revolution taking shape in computer science, specifically quantum computing. And what's interesting about this is many leading experts are projecting that a cryptographically relevant quantum computer could be up and running as soon as 2028, maybe 2030. And as I'm sure Don can attest, this time frame is also right around when an eVTOL is expected to be operational in many countries around the world. So I very much see this as a situation where not only can quantum computing really help to shore up a lot of the safety and efficiency considerations, but it's plainly a case that quantum computing cannot be ignored when it comes to the cybersecurity element. So I think there's going to be, of course, a lot of really, really fascinating legal considerations when it comes to this intersection.
Yeah, so it's job security for lawyers for years to come, which is why I do my Law Tech Connect workshop. But I want to take it back to infrastructure because while some may not think of that topic as a sexy topic, I'll call it that. It's critically important, and it's something that tends to be an afterthought in planning. Unfortunately, look, I have a Tesla. There is that thing of kind of that charging anxiety of. I want to take a long road trip, which I'm going to do, by the way, at the end of the week to Taos, New Mexico. And I did the little chart, and there's not a freaking charging station along the way. And it's a 235-mile trip. My car maxes out a little less than 300. That's cutting it close. And oh, by the way, in Taos, there's like 2. One's at a bar and another's at a hotel that I'm not staying at. So I say this because, eVTOLs, that electric infrastructure that Volatus infrastructure and Skyway Technologies is working on is the linchpin to making these operations soar. Because if you cannot charge them, if you cannot get them running, then what's the point? If you cannot have this infrastructure being kind of pervasive across these small regional airports or wherever people want to be taking off from, it's just simply not going to work. And this is one of those things where, as we think about investments in the future, this is where it needs to go. And sadly, Dan, I think this, in the United States, I love to hear that this kind of Northern California area is thinking about this. I hope it's just not a real estate developer and a vertiport or a electric infrastructure developer, because it's those local authorities that are going to make that difference. And in their planning cycles, 10 years out for transportation, they're not necessarily thinking about advanced air mobility. And this is going to be multimodal node of transportation that has to be part of that planning process. I mean, Michael, if anybody knows about planning, this is no different than plans in the military, right? We're planning 10, 20 years out of what could happen. And if people aren't thinking about this now, it's great that these partnerships are happening. But by the way, I think this came out in the last week or so. There was a groundbreaking in North Carolina at an airport where I think it was Beta Technologies, one of the eVTOL folks that's working with the military, working with Air Force and AFWorks, together with the local regional airport, broke ground on some of this electric infrastructure. Yay! Because that was the first one. And so I'll be looking forward to seeing, no kidding, when the shovels hit the ground in Northern Cali here, and hopefully many, many other places.
Well, what's interesting of it is we've been dealing with like a chicken and egg scenario with this technology. I think it was originally kind of sold as self-driving cars, but in the sky. The difference being self-driving cars could be you wouldn't have to change the infrastructure, right? That was the promise of them. Whereas this, you really do. And then the next thing is, well, it's nice if I can create 2 vertiports to go back and forth from, but then you don't get the benefits of the economies of scale that you need to really get this cheap enough to sell it. So that's kind of what excited me about this. Was it's a larger plan, right? It's understanding we got to at least get a base level going here. I wonder though, after what's been happening with Cruise on the other side of the DOT, right? If the regulators are going to be a little bit more apprehensive than they were 6 months ago. So, Dan, any final thoughts on the article before we kind of move on?
This matter of making sure that we establish a very, very robust network. This is something that we're laser focused in at Volatus Infrastructure. And I was actually, I'm in Rome at the moment. Earlier today, I got a chance to meet with our colleagues over at Urban V. They're a consortium of airport operators throughout Italy that are taking a lead in this vertiport development space. And one of the things that we discussed is that whenever these strategic routes are being built out, it only makes sense from a safety standpoint that there also be at least vertistop, right? The smallest kind of in the taxonomy of this infrastructure space, that there at least be vertistops at the kind of the epicenter between those strategic routes. The primary focus will be, of course, for safety, right? It's important that, as a pilot myself, we will always support the pilot in command. Their very much inherent right to divert, to land elsewhere for safety purposes. And I think what we'll find is that if we stay true to prioritizing safety and building out those intermediary options, that it will just kind of naturally grow and expand this network, and then get to the point where we're actually having planned operations, flights in and out of those intermediaries as well.
I thought you were going to say you met with the Pope, but I have like UV sounds really cool.
All right. Yeah. Well, we're certainly excited about the UAM future here, or the big drones, as we like to call them.
Yeah.
And actually, we're gonna keep on that topic. So Dubai Airshow, why the Middle East could dominate future eVTOL and the UAM industry. So tell us a little bit about this article, its premise, and what you thought was interesting, Don.
So first of all, I picked this because it posits Dubai and the UAE is kind of being potentially the epicenter of urban air mobility kind of in the near term. And, when you think strategically about economic, national security, I'm always looking out for like who is leading in any given kind of emerging technology space. And this article says UAE is and the Middle East is. And, they give a whole host of reasons. The Dubai Airshow is what they really focus on. That's coming up here, by the way, November 13th to 17th, with allegedly, 1,400 exhibitors, 180 different aircraft, with a focus on eVTOL, UAM markets, air traffic management, etc. They list companies that are coming, like Archer, which just announced they're looking to kind of set up shop there. Eve Air Mobility, that's out of Brazil. They're connected to Embraer, that has a very rich history in general aviation, and Lilium, we just mentioned them earlier. Interestingly, EHang and Joby are not going, but the point is they're saying, look, UAE could lead here because they have an international base. The regulations are more favorable. They're putting out this thing called NOEM, NOENEOM. It's like this future city. And in fact, Volocopter's already linked up with them for that effort. And, they're like, from a safety standpoint, there's a lot of desert to fly over. So, why not UAE? So anyway, that was kind of the pitch. And, obviously they have some money. So I think it's interesting. It's interesting that so many people are going. One thing before I kind of turn it over to other people for comments that I noted is, there's, I think you'd have to be living under a rock to not realize there's a lot of unrest right now going on in the Middle East. And, so my brain not only goes to who's the kind of the economic and, leader, and what are the national security implications. I always think in general, kind of probably like Michael, of what are the security implications here? And, there's been unrest in the streets in Lebanon. There's been U.S. forces attacked in Iran. Obviously we know the Israeli-Hamas conflict continues going on and spiraling. You've got Hezbollah out there that's deemed of particular concern. And, so before I travel anywhere internationally, I go to the U.S. State Department's website. And I did that here just to see what they're saying about the UAE. And it was kind of that orangey color. And it said, exercise increased caution, quote, due to the threat of missile or drone attacks and terrorism. And the State Department also put out a security notice at the end of October that said, quote, while we're not aware of specific credible threats against private U.S. citizens in the UAE, there has been an increase in threatening rhetoric online in the region. We advise citizens to continue exercising caution and maintain personal security awareness. Now, Michael and I have gotten a lot of training in this through the years, our years in the military. But one thing I would just advise anybody going there is from the U.S. would be to enroll in the State Department's STEP program. It's the Smart Travel Enrollment Program. And that way you basically say, hey, look, I'm going here. Here's my contact information. This way, if something goes down, they know you're there, and it's a lot easier, I think, to connect with the embassy. So, to me, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm super cautious here. So I just wanted to kind of raise some of these concerns. And by the way, none of these companies have pulled out of the show at this juncture.
So, Dan, are you going? And what do you expect to see there?
Yes, I'll be there. And Don makes a good point. There's an interesting kind of intersection that I think the projection that UAE be a leader in this space, it's certainly possible. They have, of course, as a proud former U.S. Air Force captain myself, I very much believe in the democratic form of government. And yet, I do have to acknowledge that, when it comes to emerging technologies, right, to be an early adopter, the truth is it does, other forms of government can be much more nimble, right? They can adopt, they can change policies and make the necessary accommodations, just about overnight. So they certainly have a lot of advantages in that regard for the legal and regulatory landscape. And of course, as Don alluded to, they certainly have the funds to be able to build out a pretty strong network, the infrastructure, as well as getting these fleets up and they also seem to be quite excited about. I mean, me personally, aviation flying will always be cool. So there's a certain cachet to it. To be a leader in a space like this, I think it's draws a lot of attention, and no question about it, it will bring in quite a bit in terms of a boost to the local economy there in the Middle East in terms of tourism.
Mike?
Yeah, what do you got, Mike?
So I was looking over this, and Dawn hit on it about the air traffic management. And I know right now we're having, at least here in the US, we're having issues with trying to maintain the number of certified air traffic controllers, let alone the number of pilots with this eVTOL. Do you see that now as a conflict between regular air travel and eVTOL air traffic management, and the potential for these individuals to jump ship and now cause a cascading effect with commercial air travel and air traffic management?
I don't know who wants to do. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think workforce development is a huge issue for aviation in general, as you noted. I think there's probably gonna be a lot of military folks, maybe even helicopter pilots, that when they retire, might more readily transfer over to an eVTOL aircraft than, because it's more like a helicopter, the way it takes off and whatnot, than maybe to a commercial airliner. But I think the challenge is across the board. I don't know that it's going to be a slippery slope, like the eVTOLs are going to take away jobs from commercial airlines, and pilots are going to all jump ship and go over there. Although, I will say one thing. I saw Dan Elwell, formerly the FAA administrator, is now on
Deputy admin. And
he was on. Yeah, he's on Joby's board. And one thing he said to me that kind of resonated if I was a pilot, he said, when you fly our aircraft, you can sleep in your own bed every night. And I think that from a quality of life, I mean, look, we've seen this in the military, right, Dan and Mike, both across the board, like where people are, they get out because they're done with moving every couple of years, the deployments. I mean, when you think of a commercial airline pilot and the battle rhythm of being gone, like, how many weeks or how many days every week, to switch that up could change the paradigm. It might oftentimes things like this make an industry relook at their business model, and maybe in the end that's what this will do. I don't know. Dan, what are your thoughts?
I think this is the workforce development aspect to this is quite fascinating. Of course, Don, we got a chance to briefly connect at the FAA inaugural AIM Summit. It might have even been the same presentation, Bonnie Simi, discussing, certainly the advantage of flying eVTOL, being able to come back to your family each night. And I remember her speaking in particular to mothers who are pilots, perhaps maybe not even pursuing a career as commercial pilot in the first place because of that battle rhythm, that you're speaking to. I think that we will find, because there's such incredible advancements in the avionics, at one point, at least for certain eVTOLs on the recreational side anyway, there's talk that they may not even require a pilot's license. And some OEMs are boasting, as little as 20 minutes of training necessary. Now,
I know what you're talking about. I've seen that presentation.
That's a little much for me.
I know.
Yeah, that's concerning.
Fortunately, they're making use of geofencing, right? It's a very predetermined, controlled space that even if such a pilot had nefarious intent, that the system designed in a way that they actually couldn't leave that safe area. I think if anyone is going to fly without a pilot's license, without that proper training and experience, we really do need to make sure that those geofence practices and policies are strongly enforced. It'll be very interesting, but I think that we'll find, at least in the initial phase when it is piloted, that we'll have actually a fair amount, whether it's pilots coming out of retirement because they may be aged out or medical considerations for the large commercial jets, but there's probably plenty of private pilots who would be qualified to fly eVTOLs, but perhaps just because of financial constraints weren't at the stage right to earn their ATP and fly for the airlines. So it'll be quite interesting how the workforce development comes about. But as soon as we start moving into greater and greater levels of autonomy, I think we might find that it kind of works itself out.
So
yeah, that's it. Oh, sorry. What do you want to say, Mike?
I did have a question for Dan. So when you're talking about these corridors, most like kilos and other commercial aircraft that fly here in the U.S. fly specific routes using mainly the highways and the interstates to navigate by. Now, yeah, they can go point to point if necessary, but a lot of times they'll use those road corridors, as they're referred to navigate by. How are these eVTOLs? Are they going to use those same corridors, or are they going to have separate corridors so that way you don't have a helo and an eVTOL potentially running the same corridor?
Well, they could probably use computer vision and other tools to navigate, right? So, because if you're saying that the pilot doesn't need more than 20 minutes of training, you're assuming that the amount of systems that are supporting them, it almost makes them irrelevant. So in terms of air traffic control, it's more the question of how is the human pilot going to interact with this than the other way around. And my concerns are relatively low based on what we've seen in terms of advancements in all forms of avionics and just autopilots, and how much is an actual human pilot controlling the plane at any given second these days. They're both relatively really automated. So it's more a factor of just general congestion, which I think the United States has proven you could handle a very, very congested airspace if you're diligent and safety is your primary kind of concern. Whereas if we're looking at the UAE here, they are not dealing with that level of congested airspace in the slightest. So that also actually is probably what opens up a little bit of an opportunity for them to experiment more safely on these grounds. Any disagreement on that, Dan?
Well, let me just for any listeners who maybe hear 20 minutes total training to actually engage in commercial eVTOL, passenger carrying. Let me clarify. the 20 minutes that I've seen anyway is exclusively for the single seat. These are vehicles that are, maybe flying as low as 30 feet off the ground, something much more similar to like a jet ski or an ATV, right? That kind of, this is on private land, just kind of the thrill of flying. I certainly wouldn't support any kind of system in which an individual would go from zero to passenger carrying pilot after just 20 minutes. So the avionics are quite advanced, but I don't think we're quite at that stage yet.
Yeah, it's disaster control or emergency kind of training, which is so hard to actually even train humans for, but is really what's required, right? So that 20-minute number, let's put that to bed actually here. I'm sure they'll have to revise that. But we got a comment from Ernest Huffman. Myself and Daryl Swanson are the chairs of their AAM conference, and thank you for the information. I will do that now. I don't know what you were referencing, but we love Ernest. He's awesome. You should check out any of the previous podcasts that he was on. I just want to make kind of one more statement about UAE potential for success in this domain, and maybe actually the benefits of the American system in comparison to having such laser focus as these kind of top-down rural countries have. We get more diversification, and the budgets are managed a little bit more diligently. Not only if we're talking from the democratic government top down, who gets funding for research and et cetera, but also our companies have to deal with market forces. So they're not going to just blow the budget on this or that just because somebody that day has an idea that they think is exciting. So yes, they do have lots of money and capital in the UAE, but there isn't that kind of oversight on silly ideas, if we're being honest. So it does, lead for kind of great leaps that I hope that they're able to make, but I think we'll be able to learn from them and do better. That's personal feelings on the issue. All right, but we're going to move on to what's going on in Mexico with the cartels. This is kind of following.
Before we do, Mike, did you want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors?
I did. So we want to thank Centrix, CSG Strategies, Rubric Law, and Aerovigilance. Thank you for their support as always. They make this show possible, as well as audience members like Ernest who are participating. So if you have any other questions for us or our guests, please let us know. I'll try to be more diligent on the chat than I was earlier. So this is Michael's article, Arrest of Colombian Bomb Makers for Drones Sheds Light on Mexico's New Security Challenges. So what's going on here, and why should we be concerned?
Well, appreciate that, Mike. The reason why I selected this article by Breaking News Network, but before I get into that, I got to put a disclaimer out there. This is my opinion. This is not the opinion of the Joint Special Operations University or DOD or USG. So I selected the article specifically because it highlights the convergence of tactics and technology used by violent extremist organizations like AQ, ISIS, Hamas, and Hezbollah, which are now being adopted and used by drug cartels in Mexico. The article sheds light on the new security challenge Mexico faces and potentially abroad everywhere here in the Western Hemisphere. And the threat it poses also to national security here in the U.S. The threat is from cartel manufactured bomb dropping drones and aerial IDs. We've seen it over in Ukraine, the effectiveness of it. We've seen it on the various Twitter feeds and YouTube feeds showing the bombs dropping on tanks and whatnot. Cartels have seen that. They've seen how Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and AQ over the years have leveraged these drones to build kamikaze style attacks. And then it dates back, for the cartels at least, to circa 2010 when Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, first adopted the tactic. They used the drones ultimately to evade the authorities carry out the attacks with relative impunity. In 2023, the first 8 months, so January to August, there's been over 260 attacks recorded using explosive carrying or dropping drones. CJNG and then Familia Michoacana have been increasingly using these drones to carry out attacks, transport drugs, and gather intelligence throughout Mexico. The article specifically highlights a recent operation in Michoacan, Mexico, which is located roughly central Mexico, directly west of Mexico City, where Jalisco and Sinaloa drug cartels have been fighting bloody turf wars. And the operation led to the arrest of 8 Colombians. They were there producing explosives for the drones, ultimately little grenades with fins put into almost like an egg-looking carton style delivery system that they could fly over and drop on rival cartel labs, blowing them up. I saw a couple of the videos, very accurate, similar to what we see in Ukraine. The drones, the reason why I say it's a big threat for Mexico is it's not just organic cartels figuring this out. It's the fact that they're now importing foreign fighters and experts to come in and build these technologies for them for use, which also poses a threat here in the Western Hemisphere and ultimately here in the American homeland, because it would not be a far-fetched leap for the cartels to then start using it on our borders or our security forces within our borders. So,
okay, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, it ultimately underscores the importance of bolstering drone regulation and developing effective countermeasures.
So I think we have effective countermeasures. We just need the laws to let people actually use them here in the United States. But I can go on that soapbox again. But I want to quote 2 retired general officers that I think have said things that are really relevant to this. Number one, Major General retired United States Air Force Fred Rogero. He's the CEO now of Resilient Solutions, safety management kind of system consulting. I remember when I interviewed him many, many years ago, I'm talking like 2016. I think even at the time, he may have still been in the Air Force as like the number 2, like the chief of Air Force safety. And, he looked at drones and said, look, drones have democratized aviation because a power that was traditionally reserved to nation states, air power, is now in the hands of anybody that can spend a couple $100 at Best Buy. And I think that I've heard other people use that term now, democratization of aviation. And I don't know that anybody's ever given that credit, but honestly, he was the first person I've ever heard use it, and I'm going to give him that credit. The second one is Major General James Poss. General Poss is a friend of this show. He's now he's a retired Major, Air Force Deputy A2, so the number 2 intel guy before he retired from the Air Force. And he's been going around saying, look, the armed forces trained for that threat coming across the hemisphere. We need to start worrying about the threat that's going to come across the parking lot. And it's gentlemen like these and others like them, the counter drone companies are very vocal out there about like, hey, this threat is real, this threat is real. And sadly, I think until something really awful happens, no one's going to listen to them because there's this concern about civil liberties and privacy. And look, very important, like constitutional and seminal democratic concepts. I get that. I'm a huge fan, right? Like I want to protect these things, but there's got to be a balance struck. And just allowing 5 federal agencies to have counter drone mitigation authority, to me, is a bad call. Because we all know this. Anybody that knows anything about Homeland Security, it starts with the local law enforcement. They're the ones that respond. They are literally and called the first responders for a reason. And until they're trained and have the ability and have the technology, something bad's going to happen. I'm just going to say it. And I think what we're seeing over the border is a great example of something that could easily occur here. So that's all I'll say about that. Dan, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So I thought this was an excellent article to select, Michael. You know, it touches on several key considerations for the UAS space. I actually I had an opportunity to support counter narcotics for the Latin American, the Southcom region in 2012, and at the time we really weren't seeing this level of sophistication where cartels were making use of UAS technology. So it is interesting. It makes sense that it's almost like there is, the advent of kind of a new generation of mercenaries. It's almost certainly the case that that some of these actors are bringing in very well trained and experienced drone operators to carry out these kind of missions. Personally, my biggest concern is stories like this do an awful lot of harm, of course, for the public perception throughout the United States. To the extent that there's stories like this, you really can't tell, of course, right? If you're just walking along the sidewalk, if you see a drone, there's no there's even with markings, right? If we get to the stage where we've got clear markings, like a police cruiser, for example, what in the legal world, of course, Don knows, we would call the color of law. To the extent that there's gaps and vulnerabilities in our cybersecurity, I think it'd be particularly scary when we have drones that are marked as if they are, under the control of local law enforcement, and perhaps they start that way, but if they're hacked and then used by whether it's cartel or organized crime or even just petty criminals, it's, I think, very, very frightening and can do an awful lot of damage in just whether or not communities are open to having drones be allowed to operate really in any capacity. So we'll just see. We'll see what happens, but I do think that greater education is important in all of this, because any new technology, of course, can, in the wrong hands, can be abused, and we have to be vigilant about reminding people of the truth of that.
Absolutely.
Definitely agree.
Yeah, so it wasn't even 2 weeks ago that we discussed basically a drone being used. Over to our final article, a little bit lighter, but still a kind of pervasive concern that has not gone away since we started talking about this technology. When we originally brought it up, we had talked about ChatGPT kind of violating artists' rights a little bit, and how these companies were essentially scraping this data that was available online, claiming it was either public domain, and then throwing it into these algorithms so that it could produce X or Y output based on a prompt command. And it seems like now publishers are jumping on the train and taking a look at work that they've done and realizing, especially because news is so current, that there's no other way that this information is, especially if it's from, like, let's say something like an exclusive interview, could have gotten into the algorithm unless it wasn't scraped illegally. At least that's what they're claiming is happening. And they have, I think, a rightful concern, because there's a little bit of a 3-card Monte shell game trick that goes on with this. Because it is true that I think that these, in this personal opinion, that these algorithms can produce fully transformative work that takes its influences and then makes it unrecognizable or not harmful to the original copyright holder of the information that was input. But it can also produce almost the exact words back out again. And there is no way that that is being curbed by the current utilizations I've seen in the market. And it seems like now they've run up against a very powerful lobby that could very much affect, I think, the way that this current technology is interpreted. And in fact, actually, it'll be interpreted under already existing law. And that makes it much harder, I think, for people who want to use this for things like coding or non-copyright infringing purposes. I think it will very much slow down the evolution of those uses if the creators of this content win. But ultimately, I'm kind of on their side, because how do you even get to having these tools in the first place if there's no incentive for the creators that make the content to create it, because it'll just be stolen in an instant. So those are kind of the main issues that I think are being brought up by this article. I don't want to go into the weeds on it, because I really kind of want to hear everybody's opinion on copyright and original works, and how we think this technology kind of faces up against creators' rights. Who wants to go first?
Well, it definitely caused you to question whether or not that's the right career field, knowing that if ChatGPT and all these other AI producing systems are out there, but also who's working on the back end to ensure that the accuracy is there, because whoever controls the algorithm ultimately controls the byproduct, which is coming out. So therefore, from a deception standpoint, they're able to manipulate that information in order to control the narrative or control the populace based off of the information that they want the populace to get versus what the actual truth is.
Well, actually, that's something that's interestingly happened. Not to go too deep into the Israeli conflict, but I know that people were sharing fake images online and had no clue that that image was completely produced by generative AI. So in terms of the input-output thing, these companies don't want to have the liability that the tool they made can actually produce dangerous output. And some of them have tried to mitigate that in ways by putting kind of safety rails on what you could prompt into the system. But, you know, humans are clever. We figure out ways to get around them. So like somebody figured out how to get a bot that was specifically trained not to give bomb instructions by putting it in more figurative language of, I'm writing a movie, I need to, you know, figure out how to dismantle a bomb in a scene. How is it connected so I could reverse engineer it? And there you go. Now the algorithm, because it has the information, is producing that result. So I think the companies that have made this technology were kind of hoping they could get a free pass on what it produces based on the way that other previous technologies around information collection were treated. Let's take Google, for example, scraping books, printed books, and then putting it into Google Reads. They would take excerpts and surface those excerpts if people were looking for them. It was found that that did not violate the original copyright holder's ability to commercialize their work. In this case, it seems like it does. And increasingly so over time, it's kind of harder to make the argument that it doesn't, as these companies are literally selling on the fact that we will replace jobs for you if you buy our tech.
Well,
right.
Well, going back to what you were talking about with Israel and the misinformation, disinformation, and fake images. Well, you look at the election, you look at what happened with the news recently. All the big news agencies jumped on board, said, hey, Israel attacked the hospital. Well, and in fact, it wasn't. It was Hamas rockets that caused that explosion and destruction and death. Not so being able to rapidly get the story out now is going to require additional vetting of that information before they can get that into the news feed, because they're not sure whether or not it's fake or not.
Well, so you're talking about kind of the quality of the input. It's interesting because this News Media Alliance is like, hey, they're stealing our original content and using it. And Mike's like, yeah. And both Mikes are like, yeah. And who knows what can come out of that, right? My concern is what is that news even saying in the first place? So, you know, I agree 100%. We've seen deep fakes. We've seen misinformation, disinformation for years now. I think this is going to exacerbate it. In fact, I think, I forget which article I just saw on Apple News, that Microsoft's AI is jacking up the news completely. So, you know, kind of interesting times, but I think what this article gets to is this idea of stealing copyrighted works, whether those works are right, wrong, or otherwise good, bad, or even accurate, is a whole different issue, right? What it comes down to is attribution.
Yeah.
Because you can use that information as long as you say, this is where I got it from. And the problem is they're not doing that. They're just grabbing the information, using it, and throwing it out as, you know, kind of their own, incorporating it into other works without kind of having that thread. Mike, I think we talked about this on the last show or 2 shows ago, that at least ChatGPT now, when it scrubs the internet, is giving you citations, references. So you can go back and look. That's a start. But it's up to the user to go back and look at that information, validate it, and then attribute it as well if they're going to actually incorporate it into whatever ChatGPT or whatever AI just did for them.
Well,
I don't know. Dan, what do you think?
It goes back to that proprietary information.
Yep.
And we saw in the music industry, whenever you had all the crowd sharing and
Yeah, that's the example we brought up.
Yep.
That was our original example. So.
Yeah, we talked about that. God, like what, a year ago, Mike?
But yeah, when this first came up. But go on, Michael.
I was just saying, if you haven't read it, the Spider and the Starfish really talks about those type of companies and that type of decentralized organizational theory, which allows for this type of stuff to happen. Now they've just automated it into AI, which instead of using people and groups and organizations to do it, they're just leveraging an algorithm to do it for them.
Well, they're ironically signaling the end of the open internet, because now it's not safe to create things openly, yeah. Right? So, Dan, what are your thoughts?
You know, this is such a fascinating thing that we're grappling with here, and I absolutely agree with Don's point about just how critical attribution is, right? Because the business model for media outlets, of course, there's such urgency, right, to be first to break any given story, and sometimes the sources are missed some critical element, even if there wasn't any ill intent, right? But the reason that attribution, I feel, is so important is so that we can encourage people, right, to go back and think critically, to consider the source and start to draw likely a more balanced conclusion for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we're facing, I think, new issues based on this technology, because the technology is not fundamentally bad, right? It's neutral. It's how it was first utilized, how these companies felt it would be perceived, and I honestly, this all too often used ask for forgiveness later mentality, that, you know what, I'm going to say it for the first time, a feeling that's been bubbling up in me. This is a criminal mentality. And like on a base level it is, and I think we need to retire that one. It served us well while the internet was kind of booming and web companies were growing, kind of this idea that we could replace things and disrupt them. All of that I think still stands and is valuable, but this thing has become kind of a gross kind of twist on itself. And attribution can be baked into this technology. There were outright statements that were false about it not being able to, because it seems like they're rolling out those features now. And I think that's ultimately going to be important if we're going to kind of renegotiate the information marketplace, because we can't go to a system where there's only these elite, verified, certified sources either. We've seen that fail time and time again, because any small contingency of people can be influenced. We all have our influences and biases, and that's why we need a free and open marketplace for information. So I think attribution is the only way to get to that, right? Where we can say, this came from this source is regularly correct on these issues, therefore I can trust it in this case. That's it. We're out of time. We got to get going. Dawn's giving me the red flag, so she's going to pull me off the stage with the cane. So Dawn, tell us a little bit about what's coming up.
Yeah, super quick. We're actually, I know it's Veterans Day coming up. We're in a crossover technologies month, meaning dual use, on the Dawn of Drones podcast. We got Air Agility coming up this Wednesday with Pramod, talking about his cool drones and what they're doing counter drone space. And then Thursday, we actually have an AI company. ASTN Group has created the Valmese Augmentive Artificial Intelligence Multi-Agent. Really interesting stuff on Clubhouse, and they'll be on the Dawn of Drones next week, so check that out. And thank you both for your service and for being on the show today. It was an awesome show.
Yeah, it was a great show. Want to thank both Dan and Michael for participating. Our sponsors, Centrix Air Vigilance, CSG Strategies, and Rubric Law for sponsoring the show. And again, thank you to the audience for participating. We appreciate all that you do for us. That's it. We are out here.